Good morning, everyone. I guess you saw us all chatting away. And do you like my mug? I don't know which one this was from, which conference, but I have like 3 of them and I love them. I want to say good morning. I'm Lisa Fager-Bediaco again, your virtual MC host. Welcome our guests. I'm going to give you some talking points for the day. And so I hope you were able to join us Monday through Wednesday. And if not, today can make up for all of that because we have a jam-packed, awesome day for the 4th annual International Conference on Stigma. 4th day, should I say. We are the 12th annual International Conference on Stigma here at Howard University. Some special notes for today. Please review your agenda in Whova for all the details, bios, and all the instructions. I'm going to just give you some notes for today to make note of. Special note, we have a live poster session today at 11:15, and the poster presenters will be in 3 different rooms. So please try to check them all out. You can enter and leave rooms, multiple rooms. So make sure you check them all out. Following that session, there will be the award ceremony. And then at 2 and 3:40, we will have concurrent workshops, breakout sessions. Again, please look at your agenda. There are some special instructions for one of the sessions that's being hosted by an outside sponsor. And that session is Stigma, a Trauma-Informed Lens. So definitely make note of that if that's what you want to attend. And this evening at 6:30, we'll have a special faith-based session you definitely don't want to miss. Miss Cynthia Gibson will be sharing more about those details at our break around 3:30. Please remember to fill out the evaluation forms. You know how I always beg y'all to fill them out. This is no different. It really does help us shape the next year's session conference. So we really look forward to your feedback, and we hope to be in person next year. But if not, we want information about our virtual session. Who knows, maybe it'll be a hybrid next year. And we definitely love everything that comments and anything that you want to share with us. We really appreciate it. So now let's get this day started. I would like to introduce Reverend Sandy Bailey Quinn. She is the founder and executive director of Foundations for Living, and she will introduce our key speaker. But this isn't the last time you'll see Ms. Reverend Sandy Bailey Quinn. You will see her later at the faith-based session. So let's take it away, Reverend.
Thank you so much, Miss Lisa. I love your spirit, your energy, and truly, this morning, it was good to hear and see smiles on the line. But I have the privilege of introducing a young lady that I consider a friend in the ministry of ending HIV. So I'm getting ready to introduce Dr. Chanel McGoy. She is the Director, Public Affairs, Corporate Giving at Gilead Science Incorporating, leaving the Gilead Compass Initiative a 10-year more than $100 million commitment to addressing the HIV and AIDS epidemic in the Southern United States, supporting local communities and supporting evidence-based solutions to meet the needs of people living with and impacted by HIV/AIDS. Chanel has committed her career to addressing the HIV epidemic in the United States. Additionally, with degrees in public health and health policy, and nearly 20 years of experience in governmental public health, Chanel is suited to address barriers to achieving the health equity. Prior to joining Gilead, Dr. McGoy was Director of HIV/STD for the Tennessee Department of Health. She secured and directed governmental resources to support an $80 million comprehensive HIV/STD service delivery system for the residents of Tennessee. Chanel holds 4 degrees, including a BA in Comparative Women's Studies from Spelman College, a MPH in Community Health Sciences from the University of Illinois at Chicago School of Public Health, a PhD in Health Education from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and postdoctorate in health policy leadership from the Satchert Health Leadership Institute, Morehouse School of Medicine. Dr. McCoy and her husband, Dr. Terry Powers Jr., live in Georgia with who I call Man and Mama. But Terry is the third, which is Man, and Taryn is our baby girl, who I call Mama. So I introduce to you a friend, a lady, a mom, Black girl magic, Dr. McCoy.
Ooh, you made me want to cry this morning, Reverend Sandy Bailey. I really appreciate that introduction. You are equally as phenomenal, and thank you for the work that you are doing, not only for the introduction, but for the work you're doing around HIV in faith communities and really changing hearts and minds, creating acceptance and inclusion among people, for people living with HIV among faith communities in Georgia, in the South, across the United States, and now with this International Stigma Conference around the globe. So thank you. You are a blessing to me and my family, so thank you. And I want to make sure as I get started, people can hear me. If you could just, I see someone wrote they can't hear, but I don't know if that's your computer or if it's us, but if you can hear, just someone put something, okay, I can hear well. Excellent, excellent. We're on track and we're doing it then. Thank you. Thank you for getting up early. If you are on the West Coast, which I just came from, and thank you for joining us this morning. And if other places around the world, whatever time it is, good day to you and thank you. So I also want to thank the International Conference on Stigma for having me be a part this year with your theme of trauma, recovery, and healing. Thank you for asking me to speak at this keynote address on the fourth day of your conference. It's an honor to share with you with an international community and the beauty of technology, connecting with you all from my home, not far from Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you to the conference conveners for all of your hard work. I know you started early this year working on this conference. It seems like as soon as these things end, you start planning for the next year with the lessons you've learned and engaging new partners and new stakeholders. So we thank you for making this happen. And thank you to my colleagues at Gilead Sciences, Inc., and to my colleagues with the Gilead Compass Initiative. As Sandy mentioned, Gilead Compass Initiative is a 10-year, $100 million commitment to address HIV in the Southern US. And we're doing that by changing the public perception of HIV in the Southern US through conferences like this that address stigma. The second goal we have is to increase access to and quality of care for people living in the Southern United States. And then the third is to increase advocacy and local leadership in the Southern United States. As many of you may know, the Southern United States is really what we call the epicenter of HIV and AIDS in the United States. The Southern US accounts for a little over a third of the US population, but more than half of all new HIV diagnoses in this country. So we thank the Gilead Compass Initiative partners for the work they're doing. Those partners include Emory University, Rollins School of Public Health, University of Houston Graduate College of Social Work, the Southern AIDS Coalition, and our newest partner, Wake Forest University School of Divinity, as well as our community partners who have been funded through the Compass Initiative. We have allocated funds supporting grants in communities throughout the South, nonprofits, small community grassroots organizations, as well as leaders who are doing the work to ensure that they have the tools to be successful. So I thank you for your time, your talents, and your treasures that you give to communities each and every day. And if you want to learn more about the Gilead Compass Initiative, you can go to our website at gileadcompass.com. That's Gilead Compass, COMPASS.com. There are also funding opportunities for people living and working in the Southern US. So to continue this work around stigma, to continue this work around HIV. And then to everyone else, to academics, practitioners, government workers, community, grassroots organizers, people living with and impacted by HIV, I thank you as well for joining and for your dedication to this work. I know my experience, 20 years. We are 40 years into this epidemic, and I've been doing the work for at least half of the epidemic. The days are long and the work is hard and the pay is often low and the accolades are far and few. But thank you for each and every day you decide to get up and do it again. And so I'll go ahead and start with the message that I want to bring to you today. So let me tell you that this is my favorite time of the year. Fall. Fall is my favorite time of the year here in the US. Among all the seasons, I love fall. It was the season that I got married in. We got married in a small church in my hometown with all of our family and friends in October. The leaves outside were yellow and orange and a reddish color. The weather was perfect. It wasn't too hot. It wasn't too cold. You know, there was a slight breeze. The sun was shining. We didn't have rain. It was the most beautiful day of my life. It's also fall is the season that my first child, my son, who Sandy calls Man Man, was born in. He was born in October as well, actually on Halloween. And so I absolutely love fall. Winter's okay. You know, we celebrate the holidays. It's the start of the new year. Then there's spring. You know, all things are anew in spring. The flowers are blooming. The birds are chirping. You know, the trees, the leaves are coming back. Summer's okay too. You know, there are summertime on the beaches, the family barbecues, family time, kids are out of school oftentimes, you could take vacations, but fall is my favorite season. It's when the air is crisp and cool. And often, as I mentioned, the warmth of the sun is shining bright and feeling like a warm embrace. And at night, sometimes it's cool enough where you can have a warm cup of tea, a blanket. If you're lucky, you might wrap yourself up in a quilt, a handmade quilt, a quilt that maybe either your mother or your grandmother made with love. This right here, this is a quilt made by my husband's grandmother. And I keep it here on this chair. I love the quilt. And if you're lucky, you may be able to still embrace yourself with the quilt and smell their scent. Either that, or maybe it's been stored somewhere and you can smell cedar, for example. So I tell you this because I love fall and also I love quilting. So what I want to talk to you about, I know this is a Stigma conference. I know this is an HIV related conference. What I want to talk to you about is quilting. I'm going to take you on a journey and show you how quilting and stigma have so much in common, that they're interrelated and connected. But first, let me start this journey by telling you a little bit more about my origin story. So after experiencing the trauma of being forcibly removed from our homelands in Africa, my people, Black people, endured the horrific middle passage to the new lands in the Americas. That could be Latin America, the Caribbean, and for me, the Southern US. The trauma continued with slavery, as my folks are from places like Mississippi and Kentucky and Tennessee in the South. It continued with forced labor, segregation, Jim Crow, and then my family migration to the North from the Southern US, escaping discrimination, disenfranchisement, disinvestment, inequities, and violence for a better life in the North. And that's not only my story, but the story of so many others. So nearly 6 million African Americans migrated between 1915 and 1975 from the Southern US to cities and towns in the Northeast, the West, and the Midwest during what they call the Great Migration. And so after completing more than 1,000 interviews, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author Isabel Wilkerson documented the migration narratives of 3 individuals in her book called The Warmth of Other Suns. It remains one of my favorite of all time. And I know she has a new book out and I have it on my shelf called Cass. But this one's special, The Warmth of the Other Suns. It tells my family's story. And so in it, she weaves the social cultural context that was the motivation for many to migrate north in the stories, in the lives she tells of these 3 main characters. And so my family's story is one of the Great Migration from states in the Southern US, as I told you, like Tennessee and Kentucky and Mississippi, to Illinois, or the land of Lincoln. And I have fond memories of both of my Mississippi-born grandmothers. And whether you call her Nana, Granny, Yaya, Big Mama, Medea, I hope you too have these fond memories of your grandmothers and their contributions to your life. And so with my grandmother's move to the North, they brought Southern ways of living and Southern culture with them, specifically cooking and quilting. And so like my grandmothers, I hope yours too are the best cooks you ever know. They can make a dish rag taste good. And surely, these traditions have been passed down from generation to generation. And many of those traditions can be traced back to Africa. And my grandmothers with their quilts, they created beautiful tapestry. And I inherited the joy of quilting from my grandmothers. These quilts that in fall that I love, I can wrap myself in their love and warmth. And I think about the contribution of ladies like the G's Ben women in Alabama, a small remote Black community in Alabama, where they've created hundreds and hundreds of quilts and masterpieces that they used. They were innovative. They used recycled work clothes and dresses and feed sacks and fabric remnants to create these quilts that now hang in museums. That go for hundreds and thousands of dollars. And I think about Harriet Powers, a Black woman born into slavery, just miles from my doorstep in Athens, Clark County, Georgia, where she began quilting her quilts and showing them, exhibiting her quilts in 1886. And in 2021, this year, her quilt is displayed in the Smithsonian Institution. A proclamation naming October 30th, 2010 as Harriet Powers Day happened just last year in Athens, Clark County, Georgia. So stay with me. I'm taking you on a journey, so stay with me. So what I thought for me to be a hobby has become much more of a metaphor for the work that I do, for the work that Sandy does, for the work that all of us do around HIV. And so I ask you, will you be a quilter to end HIV/AIDS related stigma? And I think of all of us as quilters, people like me and you who have picked a design, a fabric, a thread, weaving together a vision to end HIV/AIDS related stigma and move from the trauma to recovery to healing. And I ask you that question again. Will you be a quilter to end HIV/AIDS related stigma? You can drop in the chat, yes, if you join me in this journey. And as I master the art of quilting, I can't help but be reminded of the symbolism woven into the diverse designs and fabrics that reflect the more than 38 million people worldwide, 38 million people living with HIV and AIDS. With each thread of the quilt equal in value, supporting its rich tapestry and sewn by people who care. HIV has no boundaries, no specific race or ethnicity, age or gender, sexual preference, education level, profession, income, or religion. It doesn't discriminate. Yet, there are well-documented HIV-related stigmas, both internal and external, that still exist. And so I want to talk to you about trauma, about the stigma, about the HIV/AIDS related stigma. And so we know that this stigma can manifest itself in two ways, both internal and external. When you think about HIV-related stigma internally, this is how people feel about themselves on the inside, how one feels who's living with HIV, about their diagnosis, about their status. And then the external stigma. This is how the world treats people living with HIV, the outside self, how the community reacts to one. And there are so many ugly examples of how communities, of how families have treated their loved ones by not letting them eat on plates or utensils. This is still happening. 40 years into the epidemic. And then the stigma may manifest itself in different ways, hiding your medication, in which you don't want family to know your status, which could lead to not adhering to your medication and could create poor health outcomes. We can look at stigma at the intersections of identity. HIV-related stigma among LGBTQ communities. No one should have to live in secret about who they love. In 2016, CDC researchers came up with an analysis and presented it at the Conference on Retroviruses and Opportunistic Infections, or CROI, in Boston. They provided the first ever comprehensive national estimates of the lifetime risk of an HIV diagnosis for several key populations at risk, and in every state in the US. Now, I remember this. I know it's old, maybe 5 years old, this particular study, but I remember this because I was working at the Tennessee Department of Health as the HIV/AIDS director at the time. And this data was used to inform the work that we were doing. But what I realized in talking to community and listening to community, how hurtful these statistics were. These statistics said that if current HIV diagnosis rates persist, that about 1 in 2 Black men who have sex with men and 1 in 4 Latino men who have sex with men in the United States would be diagnosed with HIV during their lifetime. So that was half of Black men who have sex with men, and about a quarter of Latino men who have sex with men would be diagnosed with HIV in their lifetime. And I remember community members coming to us and saying, how the stigma around HIV impacted them, to hear that half of their community and a quarter of their community would be diagnosed if these rates persist. And it was hurtful, it was painful. And I thought about that, and it re-energized my commitment to the work, but also to listen to community and be responsive to their needs. And then we think about our transgender communities and the HIV-related stigma. Not only HIV-related, but also the stigma for embodying their authentic selves. And the Human Rights Campaign records the number of fatal incidents among transgender and gender non-conforming people. This year alone, in 2021, we are at 46 fatalities. And this has to stop. These murders, these horrific incidents have to stop. I also think about women living with HIV who are giving birth, women who have made the choice, who have decided, in some cases and in others, where the choice wasn't theirs, but to bring life into the world, who are HIV positive. And sometimes our healthcare providers and our communities are still stigmatizing women who are giving birth and bringing life. And this has to stop. And then finally, I think about stigma at the intersections of mental health, among depression, PTSD, anxiety, and isolation as it relates to HIV. Then there's the trauma of childhood, the trauma of communities and families isolating, turning their backs on people living with HIV, the trauma of partner violence, both physical and psychological. And lastly, religious trauma. The ways in which our religious communities stigmatize people living with HIV, and the work that Sandy and so many others are doing. And I know that you'll hear some great innovations later today in that session, but this too has to end. And so we can't address HIV-related stigma without addressing these traumas. We as a community in this work have been more intentional, recognizing that stigma and other social determinants of health influence HIV along the continuum, even before diagnosis and even beyond. And we must take a lens of recovery and healing in addressing HIV-related stigma. So let me take you back to quilts, my beloved quilts, and the work that we are doing. What we need is a patchwork quilt, a patchwork around internal and external stigma, a patchwork of love, of self-love and community love, one that empowers people living with HIV to recognize their beauty and their gifts, one that supports family and communities to show this love each and every day. A patchwork around the isms and the phobias, the social and structural barriers that impede progress before and along the HIV-related continuum. I'm talking about the isms like racism and sexism and classism, heterosexism, ableism, ageism. And I'm talking about not only addressing these singularly, but also intersectionally as an ally around the phobias of homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, xenophobia. And, I speak the name of two trans persons, Gizzy Fowler and Alejandro Leon, two trans women of color who were murdered in Tennessee. Now, this happened more than 6 years ago, but it still sits with me on my heart. One in Nashville and the other in Memphis. And this happened while I was working as the director of HIV STD for the state of Tennessee. The news lines around these deaths, they read, "Man found shot to death wearing women's clothing. We must stop the violence against trans women because trans lives matter and trans lives living with HIV/AIDS also matter." We need a patchwork around homelessness and shame, poverty and violence, and mental health and trauma. One that makes the supports for people living with mental health and HIV and challenges more accessible and does not look at them as the other or crazy. One that addresses trauma by shifting the language that we use, from asking people, "What's wrong with you?" to asking them, "What happened to you? And how can I help you recover and heal?" We need a patchwork of one that gives providers, staff, and families the tools they need to be more knowledgeable and more competent to handle mental health challenges. Those are our first responders, our firefighters, our police officers, our counselors, our therapists. A patchwork quilt around faith communities and religious trauma that speak to deliverance with the works of counseling and therapy and medication adherence that support and recover the whole person and make them healthy. That addresses texts of trauma and fear-driven theology that speaks of hell because of who you love, what illness you have, and because you're living your true authentic self. A patchwork around faith communities and religious trauma that takes the talents and treasures of women and LGBTQ communities from oppressing them without recognizing the whole person. We need to address those and stop. What we need is a patchwork of quilters to end the HIV/AIDS related stigma, people living with and without HIV on all levels, at government, grassroots organizers, faith-based partners, community-based organizations, physicians, private industry, people like you and me, people like those supporting and working with the Gilead Compass Initiative. And I'm hopeful because there are so many stories of hope. Patchworks of innovation is what I call it, across the world that are addressing HIV/AIDS related stigma. And one example, the Southern AIDS Coalition. The Southern AIDS Coalition has two programs, two initiatives, the LEAD Academy, which stands for Leadership, Education, and Advocacy Development, and Unity Workshops. The LEAD Academy is a retreat-style health promotion intervention designed to combat HIV-related stigma by training people living with HIV to be leaders, educators, and advocates in their community. Their curriculum for the LEAD Academy was created by and for people living with HIV in the South. And the content is delivered in person and on-site by people living with HIV in conjunction with subject matter experts and local partners. The Southern AIDS Coalition's Unity Workshop is a 2-session group-level intervention that teaches people living with HIV and AIDS techniques and skills to reduce internalized HIV-related stigma. Then there's the University of Houston Graduate College of Social Work, who's supporting Elam Urban Mission. It's where they're facilitating a virtual webinar panel focused on decreasing the stigma of utilizing harm reduction approaches in faith-based settings. Then there's Emory University. Emory is supporting the LGBTQ Center of Durham, who is doing workforce development for trans females, trans women in North Carolina. They're reaching out to companies to make sure that they are trans inclusive and can provide a safe space for trans women who are working. And finally, there's the Wake Forest University School of Divinity, our newest Gilead Compass Initiative coordinating center and partner. Wake Forest University School of Divinity is supporting the Southern Regional Area Health Education Center by hosting a Faith and HIV conference for World AIDS Day that focuses on bridging the gap between faith leaders and healthcare workers. They've also collaborated with the Cumberland County HIV Task Force to launch a billboard campaign in rural areas of North Carolina, which highlight the work of faith leaders to overcome HIV stigma. And this work is so important in our faith communities. And Sandy Bailey is a recipient of funds to do this work as well in faith communities to reduce stigma. So I say this to say just a few examples of how innovation is everywhere. Innovation is in the South. It's in our faith communities. It's in our mental health care facilities. It is around the world. Innovation to reduce HIV-related stigma. And there are so many others, so many others. And so I ask you that question again. Will you be a quilter for justice to end HIV/AIDS-related stigma? As this quilter, we can all work to eliminate social and structural barriers that perpetuate stigma by cultivating our innovative programmatic efforts with the same level of care and attention to detail to reflect the richly diverse tapestry of those who are with us. Will you be a part of this work? And I know you already are. Will you bring someone with you? There is work that still needs to be done. A lot of quilts that haven't been started yet, and there are some that have been started but haven't been completed yet. And I charge you to pick a new design, to pick another design, to pick a new fabric, a new color, a new thread, and be a quilter to end HIV/AIDS-related stigma. And I'll leave you with this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And I could never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. And so HIV-related stigma impacts all of us. And we all have a mission and a charge to create these rich patchwork quilts to end HIV-related stigma. And I thank you for your time and for your efforts and your dedication to this work. And please enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.